I'm Heidi Lee. I'm one of the two Heidis from Beyond Zero Emissions joining this session today. I'm the CEO and I have the enormous pleasure of leading a pretty incredible team of people who are all working and living on different lands across the country, and each of us will introduce ourselves from the place where we're calling in from today. So I'm calling in from my spare room here on Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation, and I'll pay my respects to elders who are past and present and those emerging, not just on the lands that I'm joining you from, but also for those lands for which we are designing renewable energy industrial precincts, the topic of the conversation today. This kind of work that we do is large scale, it's really impactful, and it's really important to us as we design these solutions that they have the kind of positive impact that we want to see in the world. So as Monica said, we're joined today by some really special extra guests as well, and I'll be introducing each person before they present. The run sheet today, you'll hear a little bit from me about the overview of the project. I'll then hand over to Guy Jakeman from ASOL Allen, who led the team that completed the economic analysis. Then to Alice Thompson from the Committee for the Hunter, who's one of the key stakeholders in seeing this work come to life in the Hunter region. And then finally to Dr. Heidi Edmonds, who is our Queensland project lead and coordinating the work that we're doing on the ground in the Gladstone region. And she'll show us through some of the on the ground impacts, positive impacts of the kinds of solutions that we're proposing. So as my first test, I'm going to share my screen. Screen 2. Okay, thank you, whoever did that. I was wondering if that was my slide. So for anyone who does not, or might be your first time meeting Beyond Zero Emissions, you do not know us well, we've been around for just over 10 years. We publish decarbonisation solutions for sectors of the economy. That's basically what we were born and bred to do. And over the last 10 years, we've published a decarbonisation plan for every sector of the economy. A couple of years ago, we noticed that, of course, when you're looking at a decarbonisation plan, and it was a national type of work that we were doing, national scale, that of course, doesn't really dive into the impacts of our work on particular locations for particular communities around the country. Not everyone is going to experience the impact of a transition to renewable energy, of a transition to zero emissions the same way. So with that in mind, we went from doing sector-based work, and you can see one of our most recent reports on sector-based work there, electrifying industry, and we moved that into place-based solutions. Here on the screen is a 10 gigawatt vision, that's for the Northern Territory. We published that one in 2019, and we're involved in ongoing advocacy with our partners at the Environment Centre for the NT, which is how we met the amazing Monica Tan we were introduced by. And then in 2020, we dived into a COVID recovery piece, which took us back to a national story about clean economic recovery from the coronavirus downturn in the economy, with a specific focus in that report on how the Hunter region would be impacted by that transition. Following on, this is the segue to what we're going to talk about today. So following on from the Million Jobs Plan, we had one chapter in that looked at solutions for the manufacturing sector. And from that, we've developed up a renewable energy industrial precinct, which is a solution that we see as foundational for rapidly transitioning the manufacturing sector in Australia to 100% renewables and getting off fossil fuels. And as you will work through this session today, you'll get a highlights reel of the kind of benefits that that transition can have for communities that choose to adopt this kind of path. So I think for a lot of us, we know that doing things together is how we do them better. So take that idea to the manufacturing space. A renewable energy industrial precinct is about supporting a cluster of manufacturers to move together towards 100% renewable energy. That is taking existing factories and fuel switching over to all electric and then powering those precincts with renewable energy. And it's also about providing that infrastructure, that shared infrastructure for all electric renewable powered manufacturing to happen at scale, and sizing that foundational infrastructure to make sure that we can expand beyond just what we've got today and actually build a really vibrant manufacturing sector and communities for the future. And there's a few reasons we want to do that, and Guy Jakeman will take us through some of the numbers for that. When we transition manufacturing, our domestic manufacturing sector, we get to go lower emissions. I got muted there. I don't know if that's a sign. So we get to go lower emissions.
I apologise for that, sorry.
We get to go lower emissions for manufacturing, but we also get to boost the economy as well. The concept of a renewable energy industrial precinct can happen all around Australia. When we started talking with the federal government about our concept, these plans for renewable energy industrial precinct, we started talking about the number of different locations around the country that met our criteria for being able to be a home for renewable energy powered manufacturing. And there's quite a lot of them. We've identified 14 of them as first movers. And of that list of 14, we are just focusing in on 2 of them in our first round of economic modelling that ASIL Allen have completed for us. Yes, we've got reports. They're available on our website. The key findings, I get to do the headlines: 45,000 new ongoing jobs in 10 years' time. That is just in those 2 locations, just in Gladstone and in Hunter. And we're looking at building up new revenue in those 2 communities, total of about $13 billion annual recurring revenue when we get to that 10-year point. The capital investment, the infrastructure investment that will go into this totals $35.8 billion. These are massive numbers. These are game-changing numbers and a real incentive to be able to put a flag in the sand to show our decision makers in the country why we should be getting in and backing our manufacturing sector, to rebuild our manufacturing sector to beyond where we are today. Not just about shoring up existing jobs in manufacturing, also about expanding them. These are new ongoing jobs that we're talking about in these precincts. And we're making sure that we share the good news about backing in manufacturing, doing it with renewable energy, with everybody who will listen to us. And we've had some really exciting media behind this project already. And you'll do well to watch this space because we are intending on continuing to do so. I am going to stop sharing now and introduce our next speaker. Please do continue to pop your questions into the chat as we go through. I'm sure you'll have some about Guy's work. So Guy is joining us today from the ASIL Allen team. They explored the results, or he's going to explore the results of the ASIL Allen report that he's done with us. So yes, definitely keep your questions coming in the chat. Guy is a principal at ASIL Allen. He's responsible for their computable general equilibrium, or CGE modelling. He specialises in applied statistical and mathematical modelling, economic contribution analysis, and economic impact analysis using the CGE and input-output modelling techniques. I've got a long bio here for you, Guy. Prior to joining ASIL Allen, Guy worked for the Australian government at the Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics and was the senior modelling in the International Policy branch. He was involved in analysing alternative climate change policies, medium and long-term international and domestic energy markets, various free trade policies. Now they put a really big word at the end, as well as an epidemiological analysis. You can correct anything that I got wrong in that introduction when you take control of the presentations. Over to you, Guy.
Thanks, Heidi. Okay, so sorry, guys, in advance. I'm going to be a bit more dry than Heidi because I do the dry economic analysis rather than the bubbly presentation that Heidi does so well. Okay, so I'll share the screen. Okay, so as Heidi said, largely, oops, I just cancelled the share, didn't I? Okay, so hopefully that's working. Is it, Monica? Yes, okay. Okay, so hang on, it's not working. There we go. Okay, so our analysis initially, so we're focused on two reefs initially, which is the Central Queensland or Gladstone and the Hunter Valley reefs. So basically our methodology consisted of gathering a lot of information regarding the CapEx, the revenue and OpEx of the major industries that will be attracted to the reef. So these things include green hydrogen, green steel, aluminium, chemicals such as ammonia, and then also broader industries such as battery manufacturing, resource recovery, or sort of, what do you call it, like recycled products, low carbon building materials, as well as some downstream related industries, so like fabricated steel products. So taking the green steel and then converting it into extra value add products and things like high purity alumina. Now, we also did include the CapEx and the OpEx associated with the REAP infrastructure itself. So, think of it as an industrial precinct. And so that needs roads and power lines and various other infrastructure parts. So we did include the CapEx and OpEx of that. To get this information, we relied primarily on public announcements of the potential participants, and the BZE confirmed a lot of these with stakeholders. So they sort of went and said, you guys have said this in the past, are you still planning that? Revise some of the numbers, but broadly, this is all publicly announced plans by people. So we haven't, tried to, blue sky various things in terms of, potential participants in the REITs. These are more participants who have looked at or are looking at entering. Now, these analyses did this focus on the REITs and not on the enabling infrastructure. So upstream in the renewable energy zones, there will be need to be significant generation infrastructure investment. And that's fundamental to the actual REIT success, is actually the upstream res. So separately to this sort of job, ASL Allen, we're looking at things like the Walcher Renewable Energy Zone and the Central Queensland Renewable Energy Zone. So that sort of will come out in separate other analyses as those business cases develop. So a couple of caveats. These are high-level analysis of the potential at this stage. So this is more just starting to think about what could be happening and what could happen. So it's not a detailed business case of each of the participants, and it's not a detailed business case of the REIT itself. It does assume that affordable supplies of renewable electricity is available in sufficient quantities. So it is assuming the upstream happens, then this is the downstream users and the benefit of the downstream users on the local economy and things like that. The counterfactual, which is becoming increasingly likely given some of the carbon border adjustment mechanisms being touted in Europe and stuff. So the counterfactual is that the existing emission intensive industries basically won't survive if they don't transition. So that is, with the border taxes and adjustments and other movement into a clean economy, it's going to be hard for these guys to continue. So that is one of the caveats about this analysis. So as Heidi said, CGE model. So we use the CGE model to do this. Now, what a CGE model is it briefly, it tries to model or does model the entire world economy, and it's got each industry or bunch of industries all selling to each other, selling to different regions, exports, imports, and all that sort of stuff. So it is a detailed economy of the world economy. Sorry, detailed model of the world economy. And basically, these sort of models are what you use to do things like the economic impacts of climate change. So I first started using these back in Kyoto Protocol, 1997. So to use the economic impact of the Kyoto Protocol, things like Ghana review, the Treasury emission abatement modelling, that these were all done using CGE models. So we're using a model which is called Tasman Global, which has been developed basically from those ABARE and Treasury models. So to estimate the impact of the REAP, you actually run what's called a counterfactual, or the reference case, which does not include the project that you're looking at. So that's in that sort of dotted yellow line on here. So this is just stylized, obviously. Where you run a reference case, and then where you don't include the project, and then you take things like population growth, the productivity growth, tax rates, and other variables as constant, and then run an experiment with the REAP put into it. And what the model does is it reallocates labour and capital, reallocates factors, it changes unemployment rates, changes prices of every commodity in order to clear the markets and end up with a new equilibrium. And the difference between the policy trajectory and the reference case trajectory essentially is what we call the impact of the REAP. So now it does include positives and negatives. So these models, they include crowding out and movement of factors, so like migration into Gladstone region or migration into the Hunter Valley region, for example. Okay, so in terms of the key inputs, this is our estimated revenue from the new manufacturing facilities. So, so over time, so we did basically the first decade. So in the Central Queensland REAP, we projected or estimated there could be up to 2 billion of new revenue happening, about half of which is coming from renewable hydrogen, a bunch from wind turbine blade manufacturers, and things like renewable ammonia, so chemical industry is a significant one as well. And we also had a high purity alumina industry, which is in there. So these are the sort of key participants that we had in the Central Queensland one. And the Hunter Valley, it was more renewable steel was the big one, along with hydrogen and battery. And there's a few probably small ones in there you can't see on the graph. So this is sort of the size. So we're talking 10 to 12 billion in Hunter Valley and about 2 billion a year after 10 years of new manufacturing revenues. So then the economic impact of this, so this is the pretty pictures. So as Heidi said, actually she didn't say these numbers, but yeah, over time we're basically coming out with about 3 billion extra income in Central Queensland and about 5 billion a year extra in Hunter Valley. So this includes some crowding out effects as you move jobs and capital and things away from the rest of Australia into the local economy. But because of where the proximity and the linkages of Gladstone with, say, Queensland, the rest of the Queensland economy also benefits. So people do things in Brisbane and send them up to Central Queensland, for example. And the same in terms of the local impacts in Hunter Valley. So the rest of New South Wales benefits a little bit. So, and in terms of the main drivers, so you can see the Gladstone has this big purple bar, and in Hunter it's a much smaller purple bar. So this purple is what we estimate the existing industries will be worth if they transition, so compared to shutting down. So this is essentially the value of keeping the current manufacturing guys in the region. Otherwise, yeah, they'll shut down and that economic activity will cease to exist. And this is the new facilities. So hence about half in Gladstone is just maintaining the existing facilities and greening them over time. And in the Hunter Valley, it's actually much more new facilities happening and less in terms of the continuation of the existing or transition of the existing industries. And in terms of the employment, you can see these are fairly big numbers, and particularly in a local economy sense. So in terms of Gladstone itself, you're talking up to 10,000 people a year through time, which is a significant boost to the local economy. that does, as we said, that does come at the expense of some other regions. So it's not manna from heaven. There is trade-offs. So you do, but they generally are things like aluminium and things are pretty high-paying jobs. So there's more value in terms of people moving to the region and getting higher-paying job. So over time, talking about 3,000 nationally. So the positives are bigger than the negatives. So still get about plus 3,000 nationally over time on average in Australia, and about 10,000 of which are in Gladstone region. This is just a breakdown of the occupation. So a lot of technicians, but also managers, professionals, machinery operators. So yeah, not so much low value jobs, but higher value jobs in general. So skilled occupations. And in the Hunter Valley region, we had about 20,000 nationally, which averaged out about 16,000 if you just did a simple average, of which about 23,000 were happening in the Hunter Valley itself. So the Hunter Valley region will have 23,000 more jobs in it over the next 10 years as a result of these new industries. And again, yeah, a lot of professionals, managers, skilled technicians and trades is part of that. So it's essentially it's a transition. Now, if we also did do things like the renewable energy zone, you'd have transitioning out of the coal-fired electricity and potentially coal mining over time as well. And so these are the sort of jobs that people can be getting into over time. And given it's only got a limited amount of time, that's the presentation. And I'll end that. We're doing questions at the end, I think.
We're going to collate questions and come back to them at the actual end, because I'd love to hear a couple more perspectives come to light. And don't worry, you have got some really good questions coming in, proper specific nerd questions. So we'll share them with you, and we'll get looking forward to some detailed responses. Very short, detailed responses when they come through. It is my very big pleasure now to introduce Alice Thompson. She's the CEO of the Committee for the Hunter, and she's going to provide some more insight on what a precinct would mean for the Hunter region. So Alice is very highly regarded as a leader in public policy. She's worked across all three levels of government with a focus on strategic planning, on infrastructure, on industry development, urban planning and regional development. So her career has spanned public and private sectors, including as KPMG's national lead for cities and region, and as a senior advisor on cities and infrastructure to former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. Alice has championed new place-based approaches to regional development, including things like the city deals, where Australian government partners with state and local government for long-term planning and jobs and investment and better transport and livability. So a fantastic perspective to add to our conversation about renewable energy industrial precincts today. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you, Heidi, and thanks, Guy, too. I get the glory in all of this. You get to talk about the dry economics. It's always nice to be called a nerd, isn't it? And I get to focus on a really compelling vision for growth and jobs in the Hunter, and talk about how the REAP is a vehicle that will help us get there. I'll just share my slides. Okay. Is that live for everyone? Perfect. Okay. Hunter economic diversification. So this is really the terminology that we do talk about the energy and the economic transition that happens in the Hunter. And when you work in the Hunter, whether it's government or not-for-profit like myself, or an industry group like HunterNet, I can see Boris and Peter Morrissey are there on the line as well. This is really the question to which everything needs to be the answer to. So when we talk about structural adjustment, yes, the entire Australian economy has been in transition from a resources economy, industry-led economy to really the knowledge and the services economy. But what that actually looks like in the Hunter is it's a pretty significant what we call structural adjustment. I've been involved in a number of contemporary structural adjustment packages around the nation, which largely focus on when a major employer is leaving town, and you have 700 or 1,100 jobs, or generally around that, and governments look at that and say, what do we do about that, and how do we support that transition? So I've got a good view to how you do it and how you don't do it, and certainly we need to be having these conversations now, because I think the external narrative around the hunter doesn't quite match what's on the ground. So I do feel that there is a perception that really, when I say structural adjustment, we are talking about not only around the coal industries, we've got the coal-fired generators there, and they're different workforces and skill sets, but either way, that's pretty big for any region to be tapping. So we need to be looking at that, and I think the hunter will make it. I think there's that narrative externally that when coal sectors decline over time, that the hunter won't make it. That really isn't the case. I think we have a significant head start implicit in the kind of capabilities and infrastructure that has been built for and by really the coal and the energy sectors. What the tragedy for me would be is if we erode that head start, that significant head start in a highly competitive environment and economy, through not really having a plan. So economic diversification is the term that we call it here in the hunter. And I find that we sort of sit in this area, which I would say there's a bit of inertia around this conversation. So we say diversification, okay, we need new jobs, new industries. What are these opportunities? So we talk a lot about these opportunities. You know, green steel is certainly one of those. Manufacturing, tourism. Here is just, you know, a handful of industries that you could look at as to how you grow and diversify your economy. But what we need to do rapidly is get under that line to that next level of granularity, which is really not what. How do we get them? What do we need to do? What does that look like in a place like the hunter? We know, without even sort of putting it through that sausage machine, that the solutions will cross place, they'll cross governments, they will cross portfolios in any level of government, and then also cross sectors. So you start to sort of structurally see, when we could sit here and say we need leadership and we need a plan, that given that kind of fragmentation, you know, there's no clear lead for this work. So I'm certainly, you know, saying our work with BZE, other stakeholders and even government within the region, we have certainly come to the conclusion that we need to choose our own adventure to be designing that future and pushing through the stakeholders and getting the support and resources that we need to go forward. So where do you start? I mean, this is
sorry,
really...
Alice, just to interrupt, people are having a bit of trouble with your sound. So I'm not sure whether if you could have your microphone closer to your mouth. You might need to not move around because it seems to be coming in and out, your sound. Sorry about that.
Okay. Let me just play with... I don't know if that's any better. No?
It does maybe sound a bit better to me, but yeah, maybe just keep powering on and just be mindful of
Okay.
what the mic is.
Sure. All right, so this is one of the most complex challenges that a region, an economy, governments can face, this massive structural adjustment challenge. So where do you start? One is really focusing on the industries and the jobs where the hunter, where any region facing this can demonstrate that competitive advantage, building off what you've got. You build from the assets and the capabilities. These are physical, it's infrastructure capital as much as it is human capital as well. And of course, it's not just any jobs. When we talk about jobs, we want the good jobs. We want the high value jobs. We want the productive jobs that genuinely grow the pie and living standards here. And that really looks like, you know, that productivity, that potential for new domestic and export markets, products and services. When you follow that chain, it leads you to the energy industry and sector squarely in the hunter. Don't have to read the content in all of this, but this gives a bit of an idea of the landscape and where the Committee for the Hunter is focusing our efforts, having had a good look at what's going on around the region and in the energy sector and saying, what are the gaps? What else do we need to do? It largely falls into three categories. One, it's to set a light on the hill. We really need some more firm targets to understand what that adjustment looks like and what success looks like, because how can we prioritise? How do we know if we're doing the right things and we're doing that right? The second thing, which I think is kind of a bit cheaper and easier, we need to tell and sell a much better story. So we've got our targets. We also need to be talking up our current capabilities, what we do, and inviting others to be part of that. And we're really looking at what investment concierge services could do in that realm here. But finally, we can tell and sell a much better story, but this is a really competitive landscape. So it's very important that we're looking under that line and we're doing everything that we can to improve the value proposition for the hunter. So the light on the hill. Here's a bit of framework. I've tested it around the region, haven't had a lot of pushback. There is probably a next sort of subset of categories that fall under that. But largely it's around a balance, it's around a system, and it's a system working in unison. So not just growing, it's not just growth and jobs for the sake of it. This isn't the right growth and jobs if we're not decarbonising the economy, for example. So progress looks like doing these things together. So what are some of these lights on the hill? It is around the economic impact that mining and resources currently contributes to the Hunter region. We know that's in terms of just straight economic activity, but it is also in terms of the royalties, which certainly do, provide a lot of buffer to the state within their budgets as well. I feel that we focus a lot on the jobs. The jobs, certainly it's the same thing. We need to look at the amount of people that are currently employed in these sectors and say, how do we maintain that balance, if not increase or decrease it? I did see a couple of comments coming up in the comments, Guy, during your presentation around, is this at the expense or the balance of other jobs? There is no doubt when you face structural adjustment and you look at a workforce, there is a set of options that you've got there. You're going to retire some of those. You will redeploy some to other industries or to other jobs. Others will retrain as well in there. We need to be doing all of that to maintain that balance. And we also need to be augmenting that. That comes back to growing the pie. So I look at 15,000 as a target for jobs and say, yeah, sure, I think we can do better than that. The economic impact and activity is also really important. And I think being able to properly address that will get us through some of that inertia or some of that reluctance to move forward more progressively and forthrightly. 60% of New South Wales electricity generation capacity, that's what we have now. I think that we can look at that diversification question, at that transition in energy and say, yeah, we should be able to equal that, if not increase that through other sources. Affordable energy, it's the price as well, particularly when you have a large contingent of manufacturers and businesses who rely upon this. It is a significant input cost. So we do have a target sitting at the federal level for hydrogen, but I would say that price is also important. And of course, we are not moving forward unless we're actually decarbonising the economy. So I think it's a really good opportunity for the Hunter to look at the New South Wales target for net zero. We've certainly got that planted there as a flag and say, what is our contribution and how do we do that? So it's about maintaining the balance, if not increasing it. And it's also about performance across. Performance looks like all of those pillars working together. The REAPs. So Heidi intimated this is a place-based approach to industry development. It's one that I've been involved at a lot and is increasingly coming back in vogue for governments to think about this. When you have a particular, say, economic objective or whole of government objective, you can take a whole of economy measures. So one of the ways that we could talk about that is female labour force participation, for example. Now you might look at more flexible workplaces and conditions, for example, or childcare subsidies that are agnostic of place. Place means that you also look at that question and you say, what can we do that's complementary? Because I can certainly guarantee you when you look at these complex problems that require a very integrated approach and you look at that through the lens of place, the problem looks different and a different set of solutions emerge through that. So place-based approaches do have a history here in Australia. They can be kind of like networks, and networks are on firms, people, knowledge, for example. HunterNet would be one of those that also does have a place-based component here, here in the Hunter. Industry growth centres are a policy for the federal government. The hydrogen tech cluster is another example of really knowledge and information sharing and that network of businesses and enterprises. Industry clusters can also be place-based. So we've got a special activation precinct here, which is a New South Wales government policy. City deals, like the big one sitting out in Western Sydney, Western Sydney, that is also a precinct approach to an industry kind of cluster, and REAPs for me also falls within that categories. Now, what does the REAP do, and why is it a good vehicle? Because it really brings together the basic ingredients of regional development to help grow jobs and the economy. It makes it much more tangible, and you can understand what to do when you break it down. I've intimated a little bit about those classic ingredients for regional development. They are competitive advantage. It's really hard to push economic water uphill. And thankfully in the Hunter, we've actually got a really good set of bones to be working from. I think it's a very different situation than when we look at how structural adjustment has been handled and the starting point for La Trobe, for example. So you work from what you've got. It is around that human capital is the other ingredient. And I would certainly say in a knowledge economy, people, humans, our brain, our ingenuity are our most precious resource, increasingly so in the knowledge economy, a global knowledge economy. And it's also about that capital investment, and in particular the connectivity that can be physical transport, it can be digital, but it's also like those industry clusters I spoke about, knowledge network between people, organisation, goods and services, and particularly getting that connectivity of place. It addresses, in my view, some really specific challenges that are central to decarbonisation. So I think that when we look at decarbonisation of the Australian economy, the resi and commercial sector is pretty low-hanging fruit. It's big, sure, there's a lot, but we actually can do that on existing technology, and arguably processes can always be improved, but I think that's easy. It's really when we're looking at the energy and emissions intensive industries, and particularly manufacturing, that we start to hit a bit of a brick wall on how do we actually do this? How do we keep those jobs now? How do we make sure that they're competitive in the future? But this is the challenge, and this is why I think the Hunter is really primed to take leadership in Australia on this question. It's around that scale, reducing that entry and that operational costs, but it's also scale, I think, is really an advantage of the Hunter. I think we've already seen that in the figures that were put up between the Rocky and between the Hunter one. When we talk to governments, as other regions do, I think we can certainly say, look, we've got the skills, we've got the capabilities to make a really strong contribution to your decarbonisation and your clean energy policies and platforms. What the Hunter can do is to do that at scale, which is really significant. It's the speed as well. We can get you there quicker and bigger. So we already have significant investment in infrastructure and skills. Guy had shown some slides up there that showed the new capital investment, and we talked around generation capacity, but what that builds off in the Hunter is all of the distribution networks that are currently sitting within that landscape that can be adapted and tapped into. Again, it's not just the hard stuff, it's the people as well. And we have a skilled, smart, experienced workforce. And that's why we need to be talking about this question now, because I know from my practice in regional development that it gets much harder to grow when you basically have lost your skilled and experienced workforce and they've had to leave the region in order to find work. It's the feasibility, including really that demand, that coupling of that demand and that offtake that might not just be within one business, it's a cluster of them, and using that to underwrite investment in generation capacity, similar to our PPAs. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And of course, it grounds and complements that whole of economy policy around net zero, which can seem pretty intangible. And we still sit here and say, but what do we do about it? Last slide. So here's the good vision bit. I certainly think that Australia's carbon and energy transition, it does not happen without the Hunter. If you pivot this on its head, then you say, if you actually want to be part of the revolution, if you want to get your hands dirty, this is actually the place to be. This is where you do it. The Hunter is Australia's energy capital. It is the right location and scale for a REAP too. We have the capabilities in energy extraction. we do the generation, we do the distribution, we retail the energy, we've got storage and export facilities, we've got the forward-leaning R&D component of that, increasingly the manufacture of the renewable energy components, and we have the largest energy users and emissions intensive businesses in the nation. So I think that this puts us in a really exciting spot to, one, make that contribution and show that leadership. But I think it is, I would say, it's about the vibe, and this is an outward message that I think I'd like to have with our own businesses on how we grow them and how we invite them to be part of that. Is that if you want to be part of that carbon and that energy transition, you do it in the Hunter. So the Hunter REIT, I think it really provides that platform to grow our energy industry and to invite others to be part of it. BZE's commitment to the diversification of the Hunter economy, it really aligns with that of the committee as we really strive together to influence the agenda and the priorities for energy in the regions and work with our members on solutions through vehicles like the REIT. Our competitiveness, the national competitiveness and prosperity in the clean energy economy, it depends on the success of the Hunter, and we really look forward to continuing to work with BZE and all of our stakeholders to support a REIT in our region and secure the Hunter's rightful position as Australia's energy capital.
Thank you so much, Alice. That is wonderful. And I've been compiling so many questions from the audience. People are keen to take part in this. The Hunter is a really incredibly important part of our energy and our manufacturing future, as is Gladstone in central Queensland. Dr. Heidi Edmonds, she is what I call the smart Heidi at BZE. She leads our Queensland projects and is here to give us probably what I'm going to suggest is a 2-minute rundown. And I will actually lead when we come back to my turn with some questions from the audience that are in your camp to answer first, Heidi.
Thank you, Heidi Lee. So can everyone see this slide? It says focus on Gladstone. Yep. Okay, I will try to give you the 2-minute run through so we've got time for questions at the end. But Gladstone is my hometown. I'm based here in Brisbane though, and Yugara and Turboland. But it's really great to see the potential for jobs, renewable energy powered jobs in Gladstone. As we've heard about the Hunter, Gladstone has a lot of those reasons that make it a great location for a renewable energy industrial precinct, from its export focused industrial sector to its great world-class port to plentiful, reliable, renewable energy options nearby. We're smaller than the Hunter. We're 62,000 people in Gladstone. And that 10,000 potential jobs that we saw highlighted in the Assel-Allen modelling is quite a large size in comparison to that. So these are some of the pieces that went into the Assel-Allen modelling. As mentioned, the new industries include renewable hydrogen, ammonia, wind turbine manufacturing. And the assumption is that those existing industries in Gladstone will continue. There's a photo of QAL's smokestacks there. Though we've got aluminium smelter, alumina refineries, chemical production and cement happening in Gladstone already. And so the modelling assumed that those industries will transition. So these were the numbers for Gladstone: 7.8 billion capital investment in the region, and this includes 1.7 billion for storage and firming. Now, this could need to increase if some of those larger hydrogen options that are on the table come around, but that was the modelling that went into the Assel-Allen modelling. The $2 billion of extra revenue by 2032 coming into Gladstone is highlighted there, and those 11,000 jobs for Gladstone. So it's a really exciting story for Gladstone for transitioning existing industry and investing in new industry. And just a shout out to the Gladstone Observer for a fantastic coverage of our renewable energy industrial precinct, which saw quotes from not only the Liberal Nationals MP, the member for Flynn, Ken O'Dowd, but also we had comments across the political spectrum, including from Labor's member for Gladstone, Glenn Butcher, the Queensland member, and also the Gladstone Mayor, Matt Burnett. So there's support across all levels of government for Gladstone. Now, I know we're short on time, so I will hand back to you, Heidi Lee.
Thank you so much. That's very generous of you. That is a whirlwind tour of the economic potential for a Gladstone renewable energy industrial precinct. So some of the questions that came through, since Dr. Heidi was so generous in being brief, I'll go to you first. So can you explain really quickly for our audience how the renewable energy industrial precincts interact with the grid so that they are actually powered by 100% renewables? Is it just the idea that those renewable assets sit behind the meter, or are we doing other things? That was for you, Heidi Edmonds.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. What was the question?
It was a great nerdy one. So how do renewable energy industrial precincts interact with the grid and be powered by 100% renewables? So is our idea just to have new generation assets sit behind the meter, or is there another approach?
Thank you. So we are in conversation with stakeholders across the industry and government, and our vision is probably focused predominantly on getting that renewable energy in from the grid. There's going to need to be upgrades to transmission to carry some of that renewable energy. But of course, some companies may choose to benefit from various different options to the overall cost from using options that are strictly behind the meter.
Excellent, nice and brief. So I'm going to go to some questions for Guy, because there's quite a few. Our audiences are very technical. We love having experts like you on the call to unpick a few things. So I'm going to ask you a couple of queries, and then I'll let you tell a little story about how the modelling was done. So we're curious about things like what makes 2027-28 such a low point? Why is there a dip in the numbers there? Tell us, did you undertake a lit review, or what did you use for the inputs of the economic analysis for Gladstone and Hunter? And I think there's another question here about was there a baseline assumption made about the rate of decarbonisation in existing industry? I'll add a fourth one because I can see you taking notes, so I know you can do this. Someone who hates to sound negative, but kind of, went there anyway. How many jobs are lost as part of this transition as well, which I think is a negative and fairly negative question. Let's have a discussion about what this means for not just Gladstone and Hunter, but what assumptions that means for other communities as well.
Okay. So I'll start with the last one first. So there was about, was it 30%? Yeah, about 30% of crowding out. So for all the additional jobs, is about one job is taken from somewhere else in Australia, if that makes sense. So
maybe you could try that one again. Because I reckon you and I have had better conversations about that.
Okay,
so what does it mean?
So for every 3 jobs, well, this is a very rough back of the envelope because I haven't actually done this math before. So for every 3 direct jobs that is being created in the REIT areas, one of those is actually being taken from other industries and other activities elsewhere. So you end up with what, two net increase. If that makes sense, yeah.
Thank you.
And similarly with the final GDP outcome and stuff. So for every $3 of GDP, you're actually crowding out like $1 elsewhere. So about 1/3 crowding out is sort of the assumption. So this is different to things like what people might have heard multipliers and input-output multipliers, which for every $1 million direct, there tends to be more than $1 million total. And that's because they don't account for constraints. So they just say, assuming we have as many people as we want can come and build and operate this place, then there'll be a stimulus in that supply chain. Whereas the CGE explicitly, its key difference to IA models is that it has a constraint about how many people physically live and work and participate in the workforce or are unemployed And so, yeah, so you get the additional jobs through changes in the unemployment rate and changes in participation rate or hours worked. Yeah. Okay, the 2027 dip, that's just literally the assumptions about the construction investment profile. So we've got a lot of building happening in the first few years, and then the operations sort of kick in later in the decade. So that's just where some of the die-off happens in the investment versus operations. The easy answer for that. Literature review, so not a explicit one per se, because we had a short time frame as well for this. But yeah, my team and myself have both been doing this for 20 odd years in terms of these models. So that is the literature. And we've done lots of jobs on like Gladstone Alumina Refinery for Pacific Aluminium in the past, and things like the alumina for QAL. So we've actually individually done projects for a lot of these facilities in the past. So that essentially is sort of some of the background knowledge that we sort of have as part of modeling these things. And so then a lot of the new literature was the new proposed projects by the participants and stakeholders. Baseline decarbonisation. So yeah, this one doesn't have a strong decarbonisation target as part of the baseline, because there's always a different counterfactual reference case that you can use. So essentially the baseline needs some decarbonisation to be happening and the border adjustment taxes to be happening for the reason why the aluminium and things are shutting down as part of the base case. So yes, there is some, but we haven't got a huge target in terms of like a specific 450 target, 450 ppm target in the long term.
Heidi, maybe I could say something about the jobs too. I can see there's interest in the commentary on that. So, I mean, the reality, as I said, is we are facing a future of job losses in one sector. And the challenge is not only how you create those opportunities and jobs, but how you connect affected communities and an affected workforce to those jobs. And at this stage, if we just sit at that opportunity level, we're not getting any closer, or we're not getting any greater justification to move forward in that. And that's where the REAP comes in, about providing that vehicle and saying it's these jobs in this region. But largely, you know, I'm not the economist in it, in the room here, but we do know that we will need to replace those jobs, and there are certain skills that can be utilised within the energy sector and even outside of that. And we need to augment that workforce as well, because any regional development wants to continue to grow the economy and grow those good jobs and the standards of living and equity that comes with that. We also can see in the economic analysis that it is about a relocation of activity. That happens really with any economic modelling, and you're looking at the BCA of any project, but we're hoping that through that clustering that you get greater efficiency, greater productivity in those existing functions, and that's the role of place in bringing it together there. But we also know that there's a lot of new investment shopping around Australia, shopping around the world, and all the new jobs that come with that. So this isn't building up one region at the expense of others. The challenge that we've got is very, very significant, but we think we want to grow that pie. We think we've got the capabilities to be able to do that. And we want all of that new investment and the good jobs it brings to park itself right here in the Hunter. Again, the REAP is a vehicle to do that.
Thank you so much. So I will consider that as a question time that we have allocated for today. So thank you everyone again to our magnificent speakers for generously, being with us here today and preparing commentary for us, and always for your ongoing support of the work that we're doing in the Hunter region, in Gladstone, and Guy, just like helping us get our numbers right. That is incredibly valuable. It's been such a pleasure to work with you on this project. I can see some really fantastic commentary as well. So while we did not get to every question today, our chat, I think, is going to be a book one day. So thank you so much for everyone for pitching in and sharing different points of view. We've got a great stream of words about algae and the energy production there. I love that kind of stuff. I love salt batteries. There's so many different solutions. As always, the role of Beyond Zero Emissions is to elevate our aspirations for what is possible in a decarbonised world. the role of Australia, the role of our manufacturing is fundamental to Australia being able to play a strong role in an export market, but also in us being able to produce the equipment, the products that we need to create a transition to zero emissions here in Australia. For many of the questions that you've popped on here in terms of the detail around who we consult with, how we engage with people in our work, in our regional work, how we're funding things, some of that is work in progress. I do encourage you all to tune in, sign up for the BZE newsletter if you haven't already, and stay connected through looking at the website as well. If you know a business or an organisation that would benefit from the transition to a renewable energy industrial precincts for our manufacturing base in the Hunter, Gladstone, or any of the other 14 first mover locations that we've nominated around the country, let us know about it through the website. Make sure that people who can benefit from this, that support this idea, are connected to us and can help us co-design what this roadmap to implementation looks like for the country.